I'm Eric Lee. I represent Will Lehman in his ongoing protest over the first ever direct elections for UAW national officers. Will, why don't you tell us about the Monitor's decision on your protest, which came on Sunday night?
So the Monitor has rejected my protest as of Sunday night, like Eric said. There was only a 9% turnout in the initial running of the election, and I claim that this is because the UAW did not give sufficient notice to members that there was an election going on. Many members submitted affidavits supporting this claim, letting the Monitor know that there was not sufficient notice. And this didn't stop the Monitor, though, from saying that even those affidavits were not sufficient or were without grounds.
So 9% turnout. There's never been an election in the history of the U.S. which has turnout that's low. And in the process of your protest, you presented evidence from over 100 rank and file members talking about how they were never asked to update their mailing addresses, how the locals were regularly not updating the local union information system. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned about the Lewis system in the course of your protest?
Well, yes, essentially it's up to the locals to maintain the local union information system. The Federal Monitor claims that it sent notice to all of the locals to update this system, but it also claims and lays the blame, more importantly, at the hands of or at the feet of the membership for not giving their local their information. Everybody knows that the UAW never fails to get dues from you. Workers that have been falsely terminated that I've spoken to know that the companies never fail to get their termination notices to them. And yet the Monitor claims that there is no way for the UAW to have gotten the information from these workers so that they could have an adequate say in their election.
So the next step in this campaign is this election is not over. The rank and file workers, about 1 million of them who didn't vote, many of those because they were never informed about the election. We're fighting for there to be a new election, for everybody's name to be on the ballot, and for every single member of the United Auto Workers to get notice, which is what the law requires in order for an election to be fair. So we're today filing a challenge of the Monitor's denial. Our only avenue at the present moment is to go through the Department of Labor, which in November, when we sued the UAW and the Monitor demanding that they give notice of the election before the first round was over, the Department of Labor opposed that lawsuit, opposed the request that they, for example, hold the vote in the local halls so that workers could just go down and pick up a ballot and cast it themselves. Will, could you talk a little bit about what we plan to say in challenging the role of the law firms involved in the monitorship?
Well, for one, the law firms involved in the monitorship have conflict of interest. They've served for General Motors on the payroll of General Motors under different issues, like anywhere from ignition recalls to engine recalls. And they have a conflict of interest that they've demonstrated being used for these companies like GM. Another thing, too, is this isn't about just my campaign. This is about every worker having a democratic say in the union. It's about putting everyone that was on the ballot in the original election back on so the workers can have an adequate say in who they want to lead the international board.
Now, the one other element which workers should know about this denial from the Monitor, first of all, the Monitor and the two law firms, their names are Jenner and Block and Crowell and Mooring. You can look them up. They've represented, and in the case of Jenner and Block, are currently representing General Motors in a number of issues currently before federal district courts, federal courts of appeals, representing them in litigation against consumers, against workers. These firms represent the corporations in negotiations of contracts against the workers. So as Will said, it's a complete conflict of interest that General Motors' lawyers are the ones who are deciding what your rights are as workers. Now we're fighting to get them removed from the case. That's what we're going to be saying in the challenge that we're filing with the Department of Labor. But I wanted to ask you, Will, in the United Auto Workers' brief, which they submitted in challenging your protest, they tell you as a rank and file worker that you can't look backwards at the corruption scandal. Can you talk a little bit about what they're really getting at there?
Well, the history of the corruption scandal is what really brought this whole election about. They claim they have jailed, or they claim they've brought to justice every UAW official that has made any kind of digressions with embezzling our dues and taking bribes from the companies. But the reality is, it's not a few bad apples. It's a systematic issue that the UAW has been through. And that's why I call for the abolition of the bureaucracy of the UAW, because there is no reform of it. But a little bit on that too, it's these same people that have been around all these corrupt officials that went to prison are still in the UAW today. And it matters that the workers have a real effort to not reform the bureaucracy, but abolish it.
What would you say to those who say that now there's a new president, there's a new slate which is in charge of the union? Of course, they didn't say that the vote should be expanded either. They're opposed to your challenge as well. What would you say to members about the change in the leadership of the UAW?
Well, another important thing is Fain is a bureaucrat that was in the administrative caucus, no different than Curry, until he saw a political opportunity for himself. One important thing to note too is he's now saying that your past doesn't matter. What you've done in the past is irrelevant. It's just that you need the correct messaging going forward as a bureaucrat existing in the international today. The reality is the past does matter. What got us to this point is extremely relevant to today, and it's not going to be reformed. It needs to be abolished. This is a situation that Fain finds himself in as a new job with a raise. He's not concerned to the cost of living that we face. He's not concerned with essentially the spiraling decrease in relative wages of the workers. He's concerned with basically reorganizing a structure that he can control, not what the membership need.
So just to summarize, we're filing a protest with the Department of Labor. If you're a rank and file worker and you didn't get a right to vote, or even if you did actually get a right to vote, your right wasn't meaningfully respected. So our fight now is to make sure that there's a new election in which notice is given to every single worker, because the way that the government is treating this is they're trying to say that there was an election that changed the leadership and that as a result the corruption scandal is in the past. But your dues, the workers never got their dues money back. The workers are still working under tiers which were agreed to in contracts that were reached through bribery. And so what we're fighting for is for the voice of the entire rank and file membership to be heard. And the election that has just taken place was totally illegitimate. Even Ray Curry, I think, as we pointed out, the day before the United Auto Workers filed their response to your protest and said that it was illegitimate, and said that you don't have the right to look backwards at their past criminal activity, of which you and every worker is a victim. Ray Curry gave a statement admitting that the election was a fraud, that hundreds of thousands of workers were disenfranchised. So we're going to expose this. We're going to be exposing the conflict of interest that the Crowell and Mooring and Jenner and Block have, and fight to give power to the rank and file.